Hi everybody, it's Callie, and today I have a video about how I suffered with OCD pretty much all my life before even knowing that I had it. So I've talked a little bit in videos before about how I was diagnosed with OCD in my 20s, but there were all these little things that after I knew about my diagnosis, learned about OCD from my research or therapy or just talking to other people with OCD, I was kind of able to say, oh wait, all those little things, all those little pieces coming together, that was OCD. I think that's a common experience for a lot of people who were diagnosed later in life. You say, oh, wait a minute, that makes sense. That's why I am the way I am. That's why I did those things. So now we're going to talk about some of those things because I made a short and sweet little list of some random things that I thought of that were, now that I'm looking at it from the lens that I have, both as an adult, both as somebody who is diagnosed or who's kind of in the know about what OCD is, looking at those things, I realized that they were OCD. When I was a kid, again, knowing what I know now, I know that I was a very anxious kid. And times were different. So like I can talk about it and kind of joke with my parents now. I'm in a place where like that's fine. And they are so apologetic now because times were different. You know, people didn't know about OCD, or I can't say that people didn't know about it. It wasn't as openly discussed or as common knowledge. You know, there were basic things that people knew, but I feel like a lot of the more nuanced things kind of in my generation went unnoticed, unfortunately. But all we can do now is try and correct that, right? But they kind of just thought that I was just, you know, nervous, or I was a worrywart or whatever, not realizing that one, I had a disorder, and two, that these things, these anxieties were like soul crushing to me. They didn't realize the depth of how upsetting these things were to me. I don't know that I necessarily did either, because especially when you're a kid, you have no frame of reference, right? You have no points of comparison. So anyway, I think there's some things that most kids are a little bit anxious about, right? I don't think that's so uncommon. And again, I'm not an expert here. This is just me kind of saying this. I think a lot of kids probably worry about something happening to their parents, for example, right? I know I did. I know I did very intensely worry about that kind of thing. I know that it would keep me up at night. I know that if my mom said she was going to be home at 4 o'clock and she wasn't home at 4 o'clock, if it was 4:01 or whatever, I would be saying, oh my God, she got into an accident. Oh my God, something happened at the store and she's at the hospital. Oh my God, XYZ. I remember feeling this way, but I don't remember saying that to my dad or anything. Like, I don't remember going to my dad and saying, oh my God, is mom okay? I just kind of sat there and you know, thought of all the things that could have gone wrong. So I think that's probably part of why my parents didn't realize it too, is that a lot of it was just me suffering in silence. I didn't necessarily ask for reassurance when I was a kid. That's how it is. I can't explain that because I know that I had a problem with reassurance seeking later in life, but not so much when I was a kid. But there were other things that I did that I don't necessarily know were common for other kids. So one of them was I had this intense fear of losing things. And it wasn't just, oh, I lost something, oh, I like that thing, or oh, whatever. The whole thing behind it in my child brain was somebody spent money on this thing, right? Somebody thought of me, got it for me, gave it to me. If something happened to that thing, it was like my neglect and my disrespect for that person, something was going to happen to them. Like something bad. Either it was like, you know, those pencils my parents bought me that I lost, they're never gonna financially recover from buying and losing that box of pencils. So what I would do compulsively to combat that is everything I owned, from pencils, little pink erasers. School supplies were a big thing for me, like an issue, you know. Notebooks, my calculator, everything I owned. I would put a little piece of clear tape on it and I would write my full name, my address and my phone number so that if somehow I misplaced it, it would be more likely to make its way back to me. And that's how I kind of combated those fears of losing that thing, is by taking the precautions to like keep from losing it. I mean, I would spend a lot of time doing those kinds of things, like putting my name on things, or, you know, keeping track of my things, taking inventory of my things to combat this anxiety. And then there were other fears or anxieties that started when I was a kid that I have seen follow me through, you know, childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, and now still in my, you know, as an adult myself. I see the common themes that go through. Like, I still would hate to lose something. I would still have, you know, I have intense anxiety about parting with gifts or things that I've assigned meaning to. Other things I think that I've seen come up in different ways throughout my life. Existential fears. When I was a kid, I was really worried that not so much that I didn't exist, but I existed in a way that I didn't realize. So I was very concerned when I was a little kid. I remember being afraid I was a robot and that nobody was telling me. And not just like, oh my God, how would I know if I was a robot? It was like a very intense thing where I was trying to prove that I wasn't a robot to myself. I don't know. You know, kids get stuck on things, I guess. Maybe a young adult or like high school type age. I remember this being an issue, being afraid that maybe I was acting out in class, like yelling, doing things that I thought were out of the ordinary for like a student to be doing, like during a test or something. Like I would scream and I'm like, wait, did I scream? And I don't remember. And I'd be looking at everybody for clues that would tell me whether or not I had done something, and if they were all looking and saying, oh, she's doing it again. So I was like really preoccupied with trying to prove to myself that I existed in the way that I thought I did. Now as an adult, that kind of fear is more that realizing that we are so small, thinking about how insignificant we are in the universe, that kind of thing. I start to worry that if I have some kind of realization that I'm very small and insignificant and the whole world or whatever by comparison to the whole universe is very small, that I'm suddenly going to act in a way that signifies nothing matters or something like that. I'm afraid that like those kinds of realizations are going to make me go crazy, essentially. Does this make sense? Does anybody else have this? Am I alone in this? I don't know. And then there were other things like famously harm OCD, of course, that was really the main jumping point for me when I had to do something about my OCD, was when I started having really intense harm obsessions. I remember being a little kid and having some harm obsessions, but they were easier for me to kind of shake off than they were. They got harder to shake off basically as I got older. I think as a kid I was more preoccupied with other things. I remember a pretty intense harm OCD episode when I was in high school. I had an impulse to absent-mindedly, I was afraid that I was going to absent-mindedly hurt my favorite teacher. And of course, when you have these like impulses or fears or whatever, it almost feels like you caught it right before it happened, right? So it felt like I was like, oh my God, did I just have this lapse in consciousness, and was I gonna hurt her? Was I gonna do something to her? And I remember having a harder time shaking that one off than I had when I was younger, right? So I remember that being kind of, not a turning point, but I remember that being something that kind of stuck with me for a while, or I was trying to figure out, was that something that almost happened? Is that something I'm gonna have to worry about? Am I a dangerous person? I became very involved in worrying about my character, essentially, which I think is at a lot of the root of people's OCD fears. So from that point, that's kind of where that story stops, and then my diagnosis story starts. Are there other things that were common threads? Probably. Everything from issues with relationships that I think kind of showed its head differently all the way from the time that I was a kid all the way through adulthood. There's other things that I had with maybe emotional types of contamination. Again, that I didn't really realize were things that maybe not everybody was worried about. Maybe, you know, the way that I was worried about them was not quote unquote normal. You look back and you say, oh wait, that makes sense. So of course, if any of this sounds like you or is making sense to you and you're putting together your own puzzle pieces or watching a loved one or a friend that might have some of these puzzle pieces, there is help for it, and there are things that you can start to do to get help for your OCD. Today, I think we're really lucky that we can pretty much instantly start on that journey if we want to. And one of the best ways to do that is going to NOCD.com or treatmyocd.com. And you can do that today, and they will set you up with a therapist that is certified in helping people with OCD and administering those proper therapies to make sure that you get to where you want to be. And with all of that being said, I'm gonna get going, so I will see you guys later. Bye.